back in January. I bet you we'll have it.
Good. Good to retire it.
The Eden Prairie City Council meeting for November 18th will now come to order. I'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Open podium is an opportunity for Eden Prairie residents to address the City Council on issues related to Eden Prairie City government before each council meeting. Typically, our council meetings are the first and third Tuesdays of each month, and the open podium period of time is from 6:30 to 6:55 here in the council chambers. If you wish to speak at open podium, please contact the city manager's office by noon of the meeting date with your name, your phone number, and your subject matter. Open podium is not recorded or televised. If you have any questions, please contact the city manager's office. The first item on the agenda tonight is in the order of acceptance of donations, and these donations are for the Halloween at the Mall event. Mr. Lotthammer?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Council members, we are fortunate for several years to be working with the Eden Prairie Mall, and it's an opportunity for a safe family environment for trick-or-treating, and the stores at the mall participate. It's also a joint program with police, fire, parks and recreation, and we are lucky enough to have contributors to that event, and so we want to recognize those tonight. It is a way that over 8,000 kids are able to safely trick-or-treat inside, and so if it feels like maybe the numbers coming to your doorstep aren't what they used to be, this might be where most of those kids are at. So we want to recognize for $750 the Eden Prairie Crime Fund, $400 the Optimist Club of Eden Prairie, and Carla is here tonight representing the Optimist Club, so we thank her for that, and $500 from the Primrose School of Eden Prairie. So these are donations that help make this a really good family-friendly event, provide some of the candy and the entertainment that goes along with it.
Thank you. Donations from citizens and citizen groups, organizations are really critical to a lot of the events that we do in the city, and it's nice to see different people rising to the occasion and helping us out with some of the great activities within this community. So thank you. Is there a motion for adoption of the resolution?
I move to adopt the resolution accepting the donations in the amount of $1,650 from various donors for the Halloween on the Mall event.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda and other items of business?
So moved.
Second.
Any items to add?
Yes, Mayor, there are a few items. So we have two consent items to add tonight. One is an agreement related to our fiber network. So it's an agreement, it's actually a very low cost or no cost agreement. There's just some indemnification articles and other articles that the council would need to approve related to an agreement between our city, some of our neighboring cities such as Golden Valley and Minnetonka, our local government consortium where we receive some of our technology services, and neighboring school district. So that's one item. The other item is also an amendment to our new lease with SuperValue. You may remember in October you approved the new lease for SuperValue for over 40,000 square feet. This is an addition of another approximately 3,500 square feet that through the process of the tenant improvements that they're doing and moving in, they'd like to immediately add approximately 3,500 square feet that we see as a very positive addition to the lease. And you may also recall that there is an option for them to take all of the remaining space in the 6 months following their occupancy early next year. So that's the other consent item. And then the third item is appointment related. Typically you do all of your appointments at the beginning of the year, but due to some new legislation and requirements related to our Board of Appeal and Equalization that deals with the assessments in our city, we need to make our appointments to our Board of Appeal and Equalization prior to December 1st. So we've added that item on appointments later in the agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else to add? Hearing none, all in favor of the agenda as amended? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes from the council workshop held on Tuesday, October 21st?
Move approval.
Second.
Any corrections to those meeting minutes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. I'd like a motion for approval of the minutes from the council meeting held that same date, October 21st.
Move approval.
Second.
Any corrections to those? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes of the special council meeting held Monday, November 10th, which was basically canvassing?
So moved. Second.
Any items to correct there? You want to correct a few of those numbers? All in favor? All in favor? Aye. Motion passes.
We have to abstain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. I have to abstain. I'm
And
sorry.
I do too, abstain.
Thank you for the reminder. Consent calendar. Is there a motion for approval of items A through N on the
Move-
consent calendar?
Move approval.
Are we up to O now, actually?
No, M
Did we-
is the super value and N is the logis.
So the annotated, we added those. So those are on there. Those are updated today.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I'd just like to take an opportunity to point out that one of the items that we approved on the consent calendar was a proclamation designating November 29th as Small Business Saturday. This is the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and it's a proclamation. It's part of a national effort to promote local business on that first Saturday after Thanksgiving. So we hope you'll think of our local businesses when you do some of your holiday shopping. First public hearing is the Green Acres parking lot. Mr. Getchell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Maybe right now we'll recognize one of our small local businesses in Eden Prairie right now with the item that's before you for public hearing with the Green Acres Event Center and the parking lot. There's a request for a planned unit development concept amendment and district review within the rural zoning district and a conditional use permit on 2.68 acres. This particular project is a request of the expansion of the parking area at the Green Acres Event Center on 14150 Pioneer Trail. It functions as an event center in the rural district, and currently the site has only 14 on-site stalls. And as we know in the past, the applicant has been using off-site parking facilities for shuttling and transporting people to different events. So this positive development that we see is this expansion of additional 55 spaces that's part of this project tonight. And it has not gone without quite a bit of work. There's been quite a bit of work with the applicant, the city, Hennepin County, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, our local watershed district. It actually involved quite a bit of work to bring this forward to you for 55 new parking spaces, but we're happy that that's before you. And the application does involve a few waivers. One of them is to allow for a gravel surface parking lot, and that does keep within the kind of historic nature and character of the site. The other is a parking setback from the highway easement line. And then finally, there is a waiver requested for the planting island. And again, that's due to maximizing the parking as much as possible for this event center. So the project was recommended for approval 6-0 by the Planning Commission at their last meeting. And I know that the applicant is here to briefly address the council and answer any questions that you may have, and the staff is here to do the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, staff. Appreciate this opportunity to stand before you as part of this public hearing process. Back in September, and you have it in front of you, I believe, a letter from the Minnesota Historical Society indicating that they would support the parking lot, on-site parking lot, using one of the existing storm management ponds that would be relocated immediately to the north. We were pretty encouraged to receive that letter based on our past working relationships and efforts with the State Historical Preservation Office. I think you're familiar with that agency as well. We then stepped forward and with our consulting engineering firm, Westwood, and began the process. To be quite honest with you, we looked at a number of different alternatives relating to expanding parking, but concluded in the end that the best approach would be to pursue through multi-agency logistics, filling the pond closest to Pioneer Trail and relocating an equivalent basin, surface water management basin to the north on MAC property. It also involved some wetland determination, soils engineering, and if you weren't aware, easement acquisitions by Mr. Schuschler, the owner of Green Acres Barn, purchasing easement rights back from Hennepin County for the current pond, and then purchasing easement rights from MAC for the future relocated pond area. And then, of course, the work that we did with the watershed. I would be quick to point out that the 55 plus or minus additional stalls are critically important to the ongoing success of the event center. I just want you to know that without your previous leadership and support as a city council, your entrepreneurial spirit, we wouldn't be here tonight because we wouldn't have an event center to pursue parking for. So I just want the people in the audience and the people who might be viewing at home to know that, because it's so critically important, I think, to the lifeblood of the community, and it's really proven to be successful. As you probably read in the Planning Commission minutes, 74 events in 2014, and 30 already reserved events for 2015, including the Eden Prairie Gala. Julie Klima, Planning Director. The Planning Commission, Robert Ellis. Robert Ellis became the point person with the various agencies, and I just can't begin to understate or overstate, if you will, his effectiveness in that regard. James Grube, the Director of Transportation. If you can imagine the county engineer coming to our staff meetings. I mean, hello. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, I've known Jim for 40 years, and for him to come to our meetings and assist with the logistics relating to ingress and egress, and also the easement that we're acquiring. And then the county board has already approved that. Then steps in the MAC people and Bridget Reef, the executive director, were very helpful. And if you weren't aware, the FAA also requires us to gain property access rights from them through Washington, back through MAC. And they said that if we wanted to go the more historical route, that would take about 14 months from now, from this evening. But MAC said they could get that waived if we took the responsibility. If that in the end they would deny it, we would have to fill the pond back in. Mr. Schuster's taken the responsibility to move forward and get the work done and take the risk. We don't think it's a substantial risk in any event. Again, you've been provided a lot of information, and the requests for the various actions really are an extension of what you have done previously with the now on-site parking. And I would indicate that I know that your police chief and your police department will greatly appreciate the enhanced safety that goes with this, and not having concern for any pedestrians that might cross Pioneer Trail. Again, thank you for your consideration this evening, and Mr. Schuschler is present if you have any specific questions of his marketing success.
Okay. Any questions of the proponent or of city staff? None? Kathy Nelson.
Yeah, I have one question. Will they still need to do some off-site parking for very, very large events there?
That's true, and we'll continue to use the sites that were originally approved as part of your approvals when we opened the facility originally, which is Grace Church and a couple of the what I refer to them as aeronautical
Yeah.
operations immediately adjacent to.
It will be nice to have more parking. Will there still be room for the cows?
Well, if they're artificial and they're from Italy, then they can stay.
A lot of people like those cows.
Yes, they do. People stop all the time and take photos of them. It's especially in more ideal weather conditions.
Yeah. I don't have any problem with any of the variances that are being asked for. I especially like that it's gravel surfaced, because that is in character with the history of the barn, plus it's not, it is pervious surface instead of impervious. But, and the waiver setback 7 feet from highway, it's understandable in order to get this in. But I would like you to address a little bit the screening that's going to be done, the landscaping that will be
Sure.
done to screen parking.
First of all, Mr. Schussler signed a waiver in the spring of 2014 to allow you to proceed with your streetscape plantings. So he already agreed to that, and then this opportunity came along. We will continue to accept those trees. In addition, we'll plant the required inches of trees along Pioneer Trail, consistent with your approved landscape plan.
Okay, is there any possibility of getting screening in front of the parking lot along Pioneer Trail? It does show something there. I don't know if it's just going to be trees, but is there any possibility of getting like a row of beautiful blooming lilacs or spirea or something like that that's low enough you'd still be able to see the barn very well, but it's tall enough that it will screen the parking that's very close to the road there?
So maybe you're advocating something at the fence height, because there's
Yeah.
a fence.
Yeah.
Okay, that would. We don't see any problem. We've agreed to work with staff for taking the city's approved landscape plan that was originally established for all of Pioneer Trail, and we'd be glad to enhance that
Okay.
to your satisfaction.
It's just a suggestion.
No,
It's
it's
definitely not a condition, but
And
a
Mr.
suggestion.
Schussler is really sensitive to issues like that, and I'm sure he'd be more than glad to
Okay. Okay.
pursue that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it. Is there a motion?
It's a public hearing.
Oh,
It's a
I'm
public
sorry.
hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry, right. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody from the audience that wants to address the council on the parking lot expansion at Green Acres? Okay.
Seeing none, I would move then to close the public hearing and adopt the resolution for plan unit development concept review on 2.68 acres and approve the first and second readings of the ordinance for plan unit development district review with waivers and zoning district amendment in the rural zoning district on 2.68 acres and adopt a resolution for site plan review amendment and adopt a resolution for conditional use permit amendment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. That's approved.
Congratulations.
Great.
Congrats.
Yes,
Excellent.
Mr. Schussler?
Address everybody.
Yep.
First of all, I want to say thank you. It's been a long, hard road, and thank you for accepting Bob as a representative for me. I was told by Mike, who used to be in the planning department, that I needed somebody that was much better than I was to be able to get through all the layers and all the different rows of bureaucratic paperwork, and Bob's done a fantastic job. The city of Eden Prairie is probably one of the most can-do cities that I've ever worked with, and I just want to thank you, Mayor, and I want to thank you, Ron, and the whole city council, all of you, for everything that you've done. I'm excited about the fact that we just won Knots.com for best place to have a wedding, and it's so nice to affect people like that. People have been talking about Eden Prairie, and I hope to make you proud of everything that we do in the future. And Mayor, if I could, I'd put in orange blossoms, but I don't think they would last that long.
No, they wouldn't.
But I'm going to try to live up to your request, and I'm going to make it as beautiful as I
thank
can.
you. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank all of
you.
you. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for coming.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the payment of claims. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Second.
Any items to question? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Aho.
Aye.
Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom.
Aye.
Councilmember Case.
Aye.
Councilmember Nelson.
Aye.
Mayor Tara Lukens.
Aye. Next, we have a special assessment resolution for 11175 Blue Stem Lane. Mr. Getchell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You may recall that this item has been carried over from the last council meeting. Last council meeting, you had before you an assessment roll for all the miscellaneous special assessments throughout the year, and in some cases even the year prior. One of the assessments that you did not adopt and that you carried over to this meeting was this assessment at Blue Stem Lane, which was discussed at the previous meeting to come back for with action tonight. You did hold a public hearing. You opened and closed your public hearing. So tonight would be resolution on action for the assessment. You also asked that the city attorney and city staff communicate, meet, and work with the property owner to see if there's some resolution or agreement that could be attained related to this assessment prior to this meeting. So, and also there was quite a bit of discussion at that meeting about several different reports and analysis that had been done on the property. So the packet's pretty thick based on a lot of that background information that was in the packet. Additionally, the property owner did also supply information as well. We allowed that to be put in your packet on their behalf. So what I'd like to do then is turn it over to the city attorney to provide you with an update and a background on information that provides maybe a history of the entire issue and also an update on what's occurred since the last meeting.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, following the last meeting, we did engage in discussions with the property owner. We also listened pretty carefully to the council's concerns about the special assessment and the questions you asked. And although all the information is in the packet report, I'd like to go over some of the information that was gathered during the process of discerning what needed to be done, how to design it, and then how we got to the assessment. So the first item that I want to touch on is the report that was obtained from Braun Engineering in March of 2002. This was a report that was jointly paid for by the property owner and the city to essentially look at what could be done with respect to the slope and stabilization of the slope. The report identified three key items that contributed to the slope condition and indicated that these were, the language was that there are contributing causes, and identified 3 bullet points. And the first was the geology of the site, that it was a naturally occurring interface between the glacial outwash and the till, which was a natural barrier for trapping water. And you heard the Public Works Director, Mr. Ellis, speak to that at the last meeting. The second item was groundwater. The presence of groundwater within and at the surface of the slope is a key factor. These are Wink's words. A key factor, or pardon me, Braun's words, a key factor in contributing to the instability, that the groundwater weakened the soil, reduces the shear strength, and increases driving stresses. So that was the third point. Second point, pardon me. The third point was the topography and site conditions, that the natural slope was, the gradient was approximately 2-to-1, and that unreinforced engineered slopes are generally constructed flatter than that in order to maintain those slopes, and so that was a contributing factor. The Braun report then concluded with added an additional statement, which in fact the property owner relies upon as a basis for saying the city should contribute to the cost of this. And the statement was not a bullet-pointed item, was not in that column of these are the causes, but it says scouring of the slope from the creek could also have contributed to slope instability by undercutting and removing support from soils up the slope. So when we received the Braun report, we had conversations with the property owner about initiating the correction during that year. We didn't reach agreement. We came back in 2013 when the conditions were actually worse, and I retained Wink Engineering, and I asked them, gave them the Braun report, asked them to go out and tell me what they thought the causes were. And so the Wink report of April 13th had the conditions that are now listed on the screen. First, and these will sound very familiar to the Braun report, the natural slope angle greater than 2 to 1 is conductive to slope erosion and instability. Second, the presence of groundwater within the slope saturates and weakens the soil, creating instability. Third, this is new, a new point not noted by Braun, the collection of water from roof drains will continue to saturate the slope and cause erosion, which then leads to slope instability. Fourth, the removal of trees, and there was some conversation about this at the last meeting, may have caused slope instability as the roots of the larger trees have a tendency to hold and reinforce the slope. Fifth, slope failures are typically progressive in nature, and it appears there may have been multiple failures that contributed to move towards the residence. This is consistent with the surface subsidence now being seen at the toe of the retaining wall. And sixth, Wink looked at the slope and movement at the creek and stated there was no evidence of slope movement at the creek. In fact, no slope failure surfaces were identified until 10 to 15 feet vertical above the water level. Therefore, I do not believe that scour or erosion contributed to the movement. Following that report, we also retained Wink to be the engineer on the project fix. We had gone through a process with the council to declare this a hazard and to have the council order that it be repaired. The property owner cooperated in that effort by essentially not objecting to the process, and we agreed that we needed to go ahead with this, and we would argue about the cost and who bore the cost later. And so there was cooperation to allow us to go onto the property to do the fix. And in their stabilization report that was prepared for the project, Wink again identified the items that contributed to the instability. The glacial outwash and the till interface was a natural barrier for trapping the groundwater. The groundwater seepage saturates and weakens the soil. You heard Mr. Ellis speak to that at our last meeting. They noted that this had to be accounted for in the final design. Erosion. There is an existing scarp that's unvegetated and prone to erosion. As the soils erode away, particularly downslope, the failures will continue to progress, and that was the reason why it was so important to get the fix correct the first time, because we couldn't afford just literally with the home on the edge to have any further slope failures. And then the natural topography of the structures being so close, the natural slope being 2 to 1, they reiterated that, and the comments about unreinforced engineered slopes were another contributing factor. So during the hearing at the last meeting, you heard the property owners were surprised by the amount that the cost had grown over from the original estimates to the time of the notice of the special assessment. We went back and looked in our files, and on July 3rd, 2013, my partner sent an email to Mr. Zoll, their attorney, advising him that Sunram, the contractor on the site, had estimated that because of the severe rains that we had encountered during that summer, that more rock, of that heavy boulder rock, was necessary, and that the cost would increase by $90,000 to $100,000. And so that was, before the authorization to go ahead and do that work, there was there was no doubt that that authorization had to be given because the stability of the slope depended upon, in part, these rocks being in place. So there was notice that this cost was going to increase as of July 3rd. So on the screen you can see how the costs are broken down. Sunram was retained to do both the slope stabilization and the site restoration. $128,000 for slope stabilization, almost $21,000 for site restoration. Wink engineering costs were $48,321. That does not include the cost of the report that I ordered to advise me about what the reasons for the failure were, that first Wink report that I referred to. The city has an administrative fee that it puts on all special assessments to administer projects because that takes staff time. Time is money, and that is $17,000. Interest on what we spent on the Sunram contract and the Wink contract was $10,000. So the total project cost was $225,449. We did have discussions, as is identified in the packet, with the property owner's attorney. They offered to pay $95,000. They had originally offered to pay $45,000 before the first hearing. After the hearing, they offered to pay $95,000. I told them that the staff and I would be willing to recommend deletion from the assessment of the administrative costs, the interest, so approximately almost $28,000, bringing it down to approximately $197,000, and that's where the discussions ended. I'd like to turn it over for a moment to Mr. Ellis. He has a couple of items that he wants to address with respect to work that Wink had done previously with respect to a survey of the creek area, and ask him to present that information to the council at this time.
The city had actually hired Wank and Associates, as they do from time to time, to do stream bank erosion surveys. And they, in 2007, had actually been hired by the city to walk Purgatory Creek from the Minnesota River north to Pioneer Trail, and using GPS technology identify any locations where erosion or other types of problems along the creek bank were noted. Looking through those GIS records, I note that there was nothing that was identified in 2007 when they did that walk within the vicinity of the Gallagher project. There were a number of spots of erosion that were found several hundred feet upstream, several hundred feet downstream, but not near the Gallagher property. They did that again in 2013. By that time, this project was under construction, so there was nothing new to note there, but it is part of ongoing effort that we have to identify stream bank erosion on all three of our creeks in Eden Prairie. I just wanted to share that with the council tonight.
So what you have before you tonight is the recommendation to adopt the special assessment in the amount of $225,449 at 4.85% interest over 15 years. It's my recommendation that that's what the council do. The assessment, of course, is subject to appeal. An appeal, we have the written objection. The property owner has satisfied that requirement of the statute, and the appeal is perfected then by filing with the city within 30 days of adoption of the resolution a notice of appeal, and then serving that, serving it on the city within 30 days, and then 10 days following that, filing it with the district court. And so if an appeal is filed, we will be engaged in litigation over this, and it's my belief that the information presented to you about the cost, the reason for the slope failure, and what needed to be done are supportive of the total amount of the assessment, and recommend that you adopt the assessment as presented. If council has any questions, be pleased to attempt to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Rosso or for Mr. Ellis? Councilmember Aho.
I have a number of questions in kind of going through the history and what took place. One thing that was mentioned was there was a removal of trees. Was that a removal of trees by the property owner or by the city or by anyone, or like a purposeful removal of trees, or was that a removal of trees because the slope slid and the trees fell down?
As I recall, it was not a removal by the city. It was, as I recall, the trees were beginning to tilt, and the Gallaghers removed them with the thought that removing them was better than letting them tip over and bring more soil with them. So that was a deliberate act done with an intention to prevent further damage. It may have been counterproductive, but that was the reason why that was done.
Okay. What is the distance from the creek to the property line between the city's property and the owner's property? Do we know what that distance is, Mr. Ellis?
I think I do. Give me just a moment here to interpret this graph.
I mean, roughly. It doesn't have to be to the foot, but I mean, just in general terms. I couldn't really tell. I didn't see a scale on the drawing.
Yeah, roughly 30 to 40 feet, I would say, from the creek bank to the city property line.
Okay. And one question I have in terms of the cost, not trying to assign, who owns what or what happens here, but in terms of the project cost of doing the restoration, if you were to say how much would you say of the project was done, the cost was done on the city property versus on the owner's property?
Okay, again,
this, do you have an estimate of that?
This would be a very, very rough estimate, and I
Right.
think it might be almost impossible to truly determine that because
I understand.
you don't know the depth of the rock that was placed. But generally speaking, there were 3 tiers of rocks that were built in an effort to reestablish that slope. You start at the bottom, you build a foundation. Once that's done, you build the next tier. Finally, you built a high enough plateau that you could actually drill the soil anchors into the slope and then fill that void in with rock. When you look at where the property line is, I might guess that a third of the rock that was placed down near the creek on the city side of that property boundary. And that's a rough guess.
Okay, that's all I was looking for. Thank you. That's all I have for right now.
I have a follow-up question that I'd like to ask on the same subject. So a third of the rock was actually placed on city property. If not for the erosion up above, would we have even put rock in that area?
No, we would have no plans to install rock along that area. And again, I'll reiterate, when I visited the site, I did not see erosion at the creek. When Wank visited the site and is found in their report, there was no erosion at the creek. There really would have been no reason for the city to install that rock. It was merely to begin to build that surface so that the contractor could work and reestablish that slope as it went up to the top of the hill.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion? Or do you want some discussion, internal discussion?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think, not having spoken to any of you, but I'm guessing that we're probably all feeling a little bit sad that there's just not a way to have come somehow in the middle. And I think the issue is that the sides are so far apart that if we were to begin to offer what we had kind of floated at the last meeting, some ideas, even your third concept, we're still so far apart that then it goes into court at that level. And then the truth of wherever is fair gets lost again, and we're not representing the Gallaghers any more than we're representing the good of all for the rest of the people of Eden Prairie. So I feel like what I'm hearing the recommendation from Mr. Rosso is let it go into court and then arrive at that middle number, because the sides are so far apart that we're not able tonight to make that happen. I mean, if I felt there had been some movement beyond that 95, so we actually could truly look at taking those fees off, maybe looking at the interest piece, is what Mr. Rosso said. Maybe, even though I understand that we wouldn't have been on city property, you could make a stretch of an argument that we still benefited the good of all. Maybe, I don't know where that would go if that goes into court, but at least we would have maybe been comfortable with that. But I am uncomfortable nights, saying, hey, we'll come down to this figure, and Gallagher still might not, or their attorney might not be pleased, and they go into court off of that figure, and then we've left our attorney who represents us and represents the people of Eden Prairie, we've shorted his hand, and I don't know that that's a responsible thing for us to do. For again, thinking, I mean, we're kind of representing lots of different people here, certainly the Gallaghers, but we're also representing the people of Eden Prairie and taxpayers and the money that we've spent, and trying to get that, whatever that fair number is for all different sides. And it feels like that fair number isn't possible right now because the sides are so far apart. And sadly, it sounds like it has to go into court to get that fair number. And I don't know that we'd be doing justice to Mr. Rosso's position, which is our position, actually, because he's representing us. So that's my sadness right now.
Okay. Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, I agree with Ron Case on that. The one piece of information I got tonight that was new was that the full amount was known in the summer of 2003. It wasn't
13.
You're right, 2013. And that this wasn't just all of a sudden came upon in the last month or so. So even though I'm not comfortable with this whole situation, I guess we need to let the courts take care of it and pass this tonight. I would agree to it.
Thank you. Councilmember Aho.
Even though my wife is an attorney, I always try to avoid litigation because it costs both sides money when you litigate. And so I really hope that we could come to an equitable resolution without litigation, because while litigation is a tool used to resolve things that we can't come to a resolution, and I think it's really tough for us to sit here, and I don't think we can do that, is sit up here as a body and try to come up with an equitable solution based on this and try to say, well, who assigns blame or responsibility. We can't really do that in a public forum, I don't think, very, very well. And so I think it has to be, that's why I suggested originally that we take it offline and do it that way, and I'd really hoped that it would come to resolution that way without going to litigation. But I don't know at this point, what tools we really have in our ability to evaluate it at this point, because we're really not in a position to say, this percent, and assign the costs. And so I think it really has to be taken offline again. But unfortunately, taking it offline in this case means litigation, which means cost. And so that, to me, is not a good situation.
Councilmember Wickstrom.
Yes, Councilmember Aho, you have really encapsulated what my views were the last council meeting, feeling very concerned about what this body could really do with this kind of potentially legal situation. My other concern is I'm worried about precedent for it, and that I think we have to be very careful. So I am going to make a motion because I think the situation that we're in, I'm going to support the suggestion of our attorney. Okay. And then whatever happens after that is out of our hands, which is, I think, where it should be. We gave the opportunity to try to figure something out. I thought that's what the past couple of weeks were all about. And clearly something that we couldn't that we could accept didn't happen. And so for me, I'm going to make the motion. All right? So I move to adopt the resolution approving a special assessment against 11157 Blue Stem Lane.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, the public hearing was last meeting, so this is not a public hearing technically. If you want to say something, I will ask my council members if they want to reopen the public hearing on this.
Well, there's not an opportunity to formally reopen the public hearing if you.
Okay.
But if you wanted to hear any comments, you could do that, but it's not a reopening of the public hearing.
It'd be just allowing comments. Does anybody want to make a motion to that?
Would we have to have a motion or just let the attorney speak?
Well,
It's up to you.
whatever you want. It doesn't
No,
have
you're
to be a
the-
motion.
you're the
Is there
mayor.
agreement? Do you want to allow the attorney to speak?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine.
All right.
Mayor, council members, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak. I share the concerns raised by Council Member Aho that proceeding to litigation isn't the way to reach a fair and equitable resolution here. I want to provide maybe context for one point, and then I'll talk about potential resolution. And that's with respect to the total project cost. It's true that after we agreed, after the Gallaghers agreed to not object to the city coming to perform the work, the first day on site, or maybe it was the second day on site, that we received an email indicating that the contractor would need additional rock to be placed in order to complete the work near the creek bank on the city property. And we're told that they would need significant more rock. I asked how much. There was an estimate of $90,000 or so. But there was nothing we could do. The work was underway. We didn't have an opportunity to say, well, wait a second, that's way too expensive. We can't go ahead. And although we had that information and we had the initial bid, it was not until the notice of special assessment was provided that we knew what the actual total project costs were, what the engineering costs were, what the city administrative fee was, and the interest that adds up to a total of $225,000. So we did not know prior to the assessment that we were talking about something in that neighborhood. I want to address two things with respect to what's happened in the past few weeks to maybe provide some clarity for the council members. Mr. Rosso's description of the settlement negotiations is not quite right sequentially. Following this meeting, or the meeting of this council in October, I contacted Mr. Rosso to convey a settlement offer of $45,000. That was after the hearing, an initial offer to open discussions. It was after that offer was made that the city's proposal to recommend an assessment of $197,000 over 20 years at 2.85% was conveyed to us. That was in response to our initial offer. We responded to that with an offer of $95,000. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why $95,000. But we made that response. We made that offer, $95,000 over 20 years at the same interest rate, and we didn't receive a response. I was hopeful that would elicit a counteroffer from the city, some movement towards bridging that gap, and we did not receive a response to that offer. And that's where things sit at this point. Why $95,000? There's a couple different ways that I arrive at that number. First off, it's roughly half of the project cost. And when you look at the cause of the issue, the fact that a significant portion of the work was done on city property, the fact that the project benefits city property, benefits neighboring properties, a 50-50 allocation of the project cost seems reasonable. It's also what the initial bid was from Sunram to complete the work. So there's reasons behind that offer for $95,000. There's been a lot of discussion about what was the cause of this problem. You received the letter that I drafted that was included in your packets, where I explained our view of what was said by Braun and Wank. I work with both of those engineering firms on other matters, and I can tell you that you're going to get a different answer to the question if you ask them, what's the immediate risk? What's the cause of the immediate risk to this property versus what triggered this that created the situation we're in right now? The question that they were faced with, particularly the Braun report, is what's the immediate risk to this property? And that's the upslope conditions. But as they say in their report, scouring along the creek bank was likely a contributing factor to the initial slope failure, and it cascaded upwards from there. That's my view. That's how I read the report. Obviously, Mr. Rosso reads it differently. And if that's a key sticking point on causation in terms of what's equitable and what's fair, there's a really easy way to figure out what Braun and Wank intended to convey in their reports. We could ask them. We could ask Braun, when you said that scouring of the creek bank was a potential cause of this, what did you mean? What was the purpose of your report? Were you looking at current conditions, or were you looking at historic conditions? And get that information from them. I suggested that it may make sense in the context of these settlement negotiations to contact Braun and ask them those questions, but Mr. Rosso declined, and we didn't do that. But that might be one way to bridge the gap. I don't know where this will end up. I'm hopeful for the city, I'm hopeful for my clients that this doesn't end up in litigation, because that's not an efficient way to resolve things. But I'm here to tell you that our efforts to date, our offer to pay $95,000 of the project cost, I think demonstrate that we're here in good faith and that we want to resolve this matter and we want to do it cooperatively. So I would request that we not turn this matter over to the court. So we give this some additional time, that maybe we ought to talk to the engineers and get their input in terms of what they think the cause is. If causation is a key factor in how the responsibility for the project cost ought to be apportioned, I think at a minimum, we ought to ask the engineers to weigh in on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosso.
I would just like to respond briefly. Mr. Zoll has the sequencing right. I switched the 45 and the 95, when those happened. There was 45. When I proposed the reduced assessment by deleting the 17,000 and the 10,000, I neglected to tell you that I also offered to reduce the interest from 4.85 to 2.85, our bond rating interest, the interest rate that we would pay. And I offered to reduce the term of the assessment to 15 years. So the 95 was then based upon the 20 years. I offered to extend it to the 20 years, not reduce it, to extend it to the 20 years. The 95 was based on the 20 years that I had offered and based upon the 2.85%. It's not true that I did not get back to Mr. Zoll. I talked to the city manager about the offer. I talked to the public works director about the offer. And I spoke to Mr. Zoll and told him that the offer was not acceptable. And that's in my report. So I declined to call up the engineers and have a conversation about it. Seems to me at that point we're getting into what is really a litigation situation where are we going to put the person under oath? Are we going to cross-examine them? How are we going to get to what their opinions are? That's what happens in litigation. If the assessment is adopted, there are plenty of opportunities to work this out amicably. I was not the president of the Bar Association Alternative Dispute Resolution section that long ago that I've forgotten all about those skills. There are plenty of opportunities for that to occur, and it may occur. But based upon the information that I have from the Braun report, from the two Wink reports, and the manner in which the Braun report is actually written, I believe that it's appropriate to adopt the assessment that the city does not bear the responsibility for this.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Case.
Yeah, just a thought here. I guess really in support of going ahead and passing this tonight to Sherry's motion, is that in our, some of us have 16, 18 years on this council, we don't do special assessments by cutting the difference or splitting the difference. We don't do that. We just don't negotiate. That's not the way, I mean, and I would think you might know that too from municipal dealings like this. It's just not the way we work. What has happened in years past occasionally is to soften the burden, and we have done things like reduce the interest. We have done things like expand or extend the term. Occasionally we'll drop at 10,000 or take the interest off or take the we'll play with that end of it, but we've never said we're just going to split the difference and let the people of Eden Prairie take half of it. We just don't do that. That's just not the way we do it. So I feel like we actually did come through with an offer that's not like our best offer now, you cut the difference. It's like that's our offer because we're coming through with cutting back in areas that we typically have done for 16, 18 years, and we don't do it differently than that. That was a real generous offer actually to do what we did. And so at this point, we're not negotiators. I guess I agree it's the courts now that it has to be. I mean, we had an offer that I think historically from my experience was maybe not perceptually generous in terms of dollars, but generous in terms of the ways that we could lower that cost. And we gave that, and that was evidently rejected by a very seemingly lowball offer. And it feels like that wasn't. We're not in that. We're not in that arena of hey, we'll split that difference again. Let's split that. That's just not our deal. So it feels like, sadly, again. It has to end up in court, but I was pleased to hear that there are other alternative measures that may end up at something like what you just suggested that we had offered. So I feel optimistic that the final number, as it goes through either litigation or pre-litigation or something, alternative litigation, will hopefully be more amenable to the Gallaghers, and because that's what I want too. But I want to also protect the tax dollars of our residents.
To that point, the court will order us to go through some form of alternative dispute resolution, whether it be mediation, which is the typical method.
Yeah.
So,
So
where a third party would attempt to creatively find solutions. I've done that for other cities as a mediator.
So basically, the vote tonight would be to say, no, this is what we're expecting in terms of a special assessment, but it can continue to be worked out before it goes to court.
Assess it, but if they want to continue to contest, then they go.
It can continue to be worked out because the first thing that has to happen is the filing of the notice. If the notice of appeal isn't filed, then there's nothing more to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Notice of appeal is filed, it starts the court case. One of the things the courts in Hennepin County always require is alternative dispute resolution before you go to trial. So that would be done, and there are many mediators out there who are quite skillful in trying to resolve what seemed like an impasse. It's possible. I don't know what that solution would be. I firmly believe that the reports tell us where the responsibility and cause lies here. It's not a personal responsibility that we're not assigning blame to individuals, but it's the situation of the soils and the condition of the property.
Was there something else you wanted to say, Mr. Zoll?
Yeah, I apologize. I have nothing more that I want to say, but my client, Mr. Gallagher, would like to be able to address yourself and the council prior to your vote.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. The last time I was here about a month ago, because of the scope of the issue that we were going to be talking about, I suggested that you might possibly want to walk down the path that the city built in Purgatory, around Purgatory Creek. Any of you had the opportunity to do that over the last 30 days?
No,
we were actually advised not to. I actually wanted to, but it made sense not to in this environment.
And we're not geology.
3 weeks ago, I put on a pair of waders, very similar to what Mr. Ellis said the Wanks did. And I got into Purgatory Creek right where the bridge goes from our neighborhood into the Homeward Hills neighborhood. I walked the entire creek to about 7 houses past my house, our house. I took several hundred pictures, and I took a lot of videotape. Now, contrary to what Mr. Ellis said, there's significant erosion on every single bend of the creek. And I've got pictures of it, and I got videotape of it, okay? Now, again, that really probably doesn't impact a lot of the homeowners along the creek, okay? But what does impact several of the homeowners along that creek is the fact that when the creek takes a very sharp bend, and as you well know, during the summertime and the spring, a lot of rain, the creek runs very fast and very high because it's going downhill. There is significant damage, okay? Now, both Mr. Ellis and the Wank report said there was no erosion, but you have a statement from Tom Heffelfinger, the former U.S. attorney who was my next door neighbor, who said since 1992, he's been down there at least twice a year, there was significant erosion. And yeah, as the hill fell down, it covered up the erosion, and then more erosion happened, okay? If you would look at Exhibit B1 through B4, please. I'd like to draw your attention to both of those.
Do you know what page that is in our documents?
They're the pictures, okay? At the same time this summer, when the house was going down into the valley along with the crane, 65 yards of the creek bank went down into the creek along with 3 dozen trees, okay? That's my neighbor's, right behind my neighbor's house. That is 3 doors down from our house. 3 doors down, okay? That erosion is now 65 yards wide, 40 feet high, and anywhere from 10 to 20 feet into the hill itself. The city itself had to close the trail because part of the trail actually went down into the creek too. Now, that's probably not going to impact my neighbor for a couple years because their house isn't on nearly as steep a gradient as my house is. But if you look at C1, that's 8 doors up from our home. That's a little bit more problematic. That erosion is now 50 feet high, 40 feet wide, and 20 feet into their hill. We were at the neighbor's house on Sunday. They said they had reported it to the city. The city came out and looked at it, and they said the same exact thing that they said to us 10 years ago, Mr. Slick. And they said, you know what? We'll keep watching on it, but this is going to be very expensive to fix. All right? I took a videotape of this last year. This erosion has now doubled in size just in the last year. I've also got pictures of across the creek where other houses have had erosion too. Right. Mr. Rousseau has explained too, and it's in the Wank report, about cutting down of the trees. It's very interesting because Wank is the one, the senior engineer, who came out to our house and strongly suggested that we top the trees and cut them down because by that time they were hanging over, and every time the wind hit them, they would start to shake and bring down more of the slope. They were the ones that told us to cut the tree down. Okay? Mr. Ellis made a comment at the last meeting that if we had done something sooner, it would have been a lot cheaper. We did everything that you could possibly ask us to do, okay? We asked the city to come out, the city engineers to come out. I hired several construction companies. I had Braun Engineering came out in 2010 and did a report for us before they came out the second time and did the report in 2012. Everybody that came out, every construction company that came out, and Braun Engineering when they came out, gave us some ideas about how to stabilize our house. Because believe us, we would lay awake every night saying, "Is tonight the night the house goes down the hill?" Okay. Every single one of the remediations that they told us about always had a caveat. And the caveat was, unless the city fixes the bottom slope on their property, whatever we do is problematic. We can put up a wall, we can put up piles, we can put up, stakes. Won't matter, because sooner or later, the city's property will continue to erode, and whatever we do will continue to erode on top of that. The water that Mr. Ellis, it's very interesting, the water that Mr. Ellis keeps referring to about the underground stream that's coming out. It's very interesting that they only looked at our property. And again, Mr. Ellis and Wenk only looked at our property since 2011. So they were never down there when it was originally, when the original situation started. Randy Slick was. He took pictures of it, and I'm sure someday he will testify to the fact that there was major erosion on that property. They didn't look at Mr. Heffelfinger's property, who had the same exact situation. There's water coming out at the bottom of their hill, just like there was at ours. The issue is, his hill is straight. It's steeper than mine, but the creek behind his hill is straight. Now again, the only erosion, the major erosion around the creek that homeowners have to worry about is when the creek comes straight at their property and makes a sharp right. Just like it does in ours, like it does 3 houses down from ours that collapsed and 8 houses down. The last point I want to make is that Mr. Rossell, mentioned that, at least in his report, that we were trying to put the entire cost on the city. That's never been the case. My wife and I have gone out of our way to collaborate every single time the city came down or engineers came down. We tried to work with you. We even split the cost of the second Braun engineering report. And again, I had to rely, I'm not an engineer, as you keep saying that we don't have engineering backgrounds or engineering expertise. I had to rely on what the city told us, what the city engineers told us, and what Wenk and Braun told us, okay? And again, that was the situation that we were facing. All I've ever asked is for the city to be fair with us, okay? I didn't come in and say, you know what, I want you to pay the whole thing. I just asked us to be fair. Now, Mr. Ellis is wrong as far as his estimation, because over half of the work that was actually done is on city property. And I've had an assayer come in and stake out the property, so we know that. Over half of it is on city property. If our house had gone down, Mr. Heffelfinger's house would have gone down also, because it's that close to our house, and they're much, much steeper in that area. My attorney told us if we had to go to court, which sounds like it's the next step, it's probably going to cost both of us, each of us, $50,000 to $70,000. That's the estimate. You'll bring in your engineers, we'll bring in our engineers. I feel like I have a very strong case. I'm sure Mr. Rossell thinks they have a strong case. And again, I totally understand where Mr. Rossell is coming from, and Mr. Ellis is coming from, and Mr. Getshaw is coming from. Okay, they work for the city. But you all were elected to represent us, the collective us, the homeowners of this city. All I've ever asked you for is to be fair with my wife and myself and my family. Okay? I've never asked you to go above and beyond anything beyond that. All right? I'm sure you have deep pockets. I don't. I think I mentioned the last time I'm getting ready to retire. I'm 70 years old. All right? I'll have Social Security, and I'll have my military benefit that I get. All right? I also mentioned that I was in the Army. What I did for 20 years, I was a Green Beret. All right? Vietnam veteran. I've been wounded 3 times, and each time I've gone back. I don't quit. It's not in my DNA. All right? Again, all I've ever asked for the city is to be fair with us. We've asked to go to mediation. That's kind of, it sounded like it was off the table. So again, I'm just asking the city to be fair with us. All right? Madam Mayor, thank you.
Thank you.
Members of the City Council.
Councilmember Aho.
Who has the first question?
I guess I don't have a question for you. I just have a question for us. I appreciate your statements. Like I stated before, I don't know that we can. I don't feel that we have the ability to separate what the costs are here, and I don't want to start doing that at this level. But I do feel that if we send it to the court system, there's an added cost to both sides, and it almost adds up to the cost of the project, when you really start looking at the true costs, because I've seen those costs, in talking with my wife and looking at cases, and it really adds a lot of cost and for no benefit to either side. And so, do you think there would be any advantage to, and I should ask this of Mr. Rosso as well, is there any advantage to giving another 2-week period to look at this and take one more attempt at resolution prior to going to court, or is court our only option at this point?
Mr. Rosso?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I don't believe there's a reason to put off the vote tonight. There is a 30-day period before a petition notice of appeal has to be filed. I have never said I'm not willing to mediate. I am a mediator. I believe in mediation. And I've mediated special assessment disputes, and I've helped cities and property owners resolve them. Can't promise that that would happen here. Every case is unique. But I believe I believe that how Councilmember Aho states it, that it's very difficult for the council to start parsing out these numbers and negotiating at the table. And so to get that process started, I believe that the assessment should be adopted, and it does not stop us from further conversation. Just as Mr. Gallagher has been very polite and respectful and understands where I'm coming from, I have the utmost respect for him and understand where he's coming from. We've had conversations outside of this context. When we went to the foundation ball, we were on the same bus, sitting next to each other, and had a nice conversation, sat next in the same row during the auction. This isn't anything personal, and I think the assessment should be adopted.
So what you're saying is that if we approve the assessment tonight, then there's still an opportunity to, before taking it to court, to further mediate and come to a resolution.
There would be opportunities before as well as after a petition was filed and before everyone's geared up with large costs, yes.
I mean, that's really what I'm proposing, is we need some resolution before having to take it to court, because I think that is just so costly.
But I think that will happen if we make the motion. There is that capacity for that very thing to happen.
And that's what I want to see happen.
Well, there's a motion on the table.
Yep, there's a motion and a second on the table. Just you do have your light on. Sorry. Councilmember Case.
I'm comfortable with that. Not real comfortable. Leaning that way. But just to pursue, Mr. Rosso, one more thing that piggybacking on what Mr. Aho said. Is there no formal, I understand once it's filed, it becomes maybe easier to get a formal mediation setting. Is there no ability to have a voluntary, but nonetheless formal, maybe not binding, but a mediation environment where somebody sits down with the two parties? I think that's what Brad was trying to say, that between now and the next meeting, one more opportunity to have that. There's a sense of where we stand tonight. I think that we've been very clear that we're not going to. This is not going to come out for $100,000 for the Gallaghers, and so I think people understand that. But I think there's a sense that if it comes closer to the 197, that saves $50,000 of costs on both sides. That there's a number that if we gave them one more chance, knowing where we're standing tonight, if that's not, if there is no system out there, if there's no structure for that, then we send it into a more formal process. I'm okay with that. I just want to pursue Brad's thought one more time to make sure that there's no chance of some type of mediating environment, because sides are clearer after this conversation tonight. I mean, we're not in the position to do the negotiating or to say, knock another 20 off. You're in a position to understand, and so are the Gallaghers tonight. The number is much, much closer to the 227 than it is to the 95. So if there was some environment in the next 2 weeks to have that conversation take place with you and give them one more chance to go back to the table and look at that prior to taking this into some legal setting, I want to know if that's possible.
One, adoption of the resolution does not automatically throw it into a legal setting.
Right.
Two, between the time you adopt the resolution, we have ample time to have further conversations, and I commit to you that I will have conversations with Mr. Zoll about this. and I expect he's willing to have those conversations. And we would be able to, on a voluntary basis, enter into mediation even before court ordered us to do that. We could do that, there's a cost to that, of course, but we could do that. But I think it's, from the city's point of view, I think it's better for the city to have clearly, through adoption of the resolution, taken a position that the mediator then could understand, as opposed to trying to convey what the sense of the council was from the conversation. So I think the resolution does that. It sets where we're at, gives the mediator good information in terms of where she or he has to work in order to see if they can help us resolve it. Any mediation is a non-binding process. The mediator doesn't say this is what you're going to do. Any proposal that comes out of the mediation, the Gallaghers can accept or reject on the spot. I need to come back here, and in the privacy of a closed session, because it involves settlement negotiations of litigation as opposed to pre-settlement negotiations, have a conversation with you, and then if you're so disposed, you would come into open session and take some action. But that's my recommendation continues to be to adopt the assessment.
Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, I would like to see whatever mediation. The one thing I'd like to add to it is, because this is precedent, I want this to be fair to prior residents who have had assessments they may or may not have liked, and future residents who will have assessments they may or may not like, as well as to the Gallaghers. So it's, I'm not sure how this will end, should end, what more problems we may have along creeks of various kinds or rivers in Eden Prairie. But, with the fairness looking past and future and present, I would like to have the city take that into account, and I'm assuming that you will do that. And I think that's what every resident needs to know, is that there is fairness for them if it comes up to them.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. So hopefully we'll hear back in 2 weeks. I think our next meeting is December 4th, is it?
December 2nd.
Or 2nd, okay. The next item is appointments for the Board of Appeal and Equalization. Mr. Getchell?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We did add this tonight. As I mentioned, we have a Board of Equalization that meets 2 times a year, average of 2 times a year, to deal with property valuations and questions and appeals of property valuations. And the City Council appoints those members to that commission. This is a board that we've had operating since 1992. The members of the board are citizen volunteers who are active and very knowledgeable and have extensive experience, mainly their careers, in the real estate market, that offer to serve their time for the City of Eden Prairie as our Board of Appeal and Equalization. So the action tonight is to appoint 3 members of the board for a period of March 1st to May 31st of 2015, or until such time as they need to complete their work for next year's property assessment.
Okay. All right. Yes, we need a motion.
I would move to appoint to the Board of Appeal and Equalization Lyndon Moquist, Annette O'Connor, and Todd L. Walker for the period of March 1st, 2015 through May 31st, 2015, or until the Board of Appeal and Equalization completes its work.
Second.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
The motion passes. Next item is a report from our Public Works Director on the Eden Prairie pedestrian and bicycle plan that we've been working on. Is this the same thing that we got in our packet?
It may be.
Okay, all right,
Oh,
then
yeah.
I won't take another one.
Okay, you have one, all
Yeah.
right. Well, I brought an extra. I knew it was so large that it might not,
Oh, I
nobody
didn't
would have
bring
maybe
mine with me.
printed it, so I
Okay.
brought a
Anything that
paper
was
copy.
online in the draft?
It is, yeah, exactly. So tonight, I wanted to spend just a few minutes presenting the final draft of the pedestrian and bicycle plan for the city of Eden Prairie. This is an effort that started probably in 2012, 2013 at a council goal session. There was discussion about taking our pedestrian and bicycle plan to the next level. It's always been a part of the parks open space as a chapter in that. I think the desire was to just take the next step with our infrastructure, our trail and sidewalk infrastructure, and see where the city needs to go in the next 10 to 15, 20 years as we look forward as our community grows. So the city actually reached out to Hennepin County and tried to find some sort of a grant to help us fund this, and we were successful. We were selected as the recipient of the Community Transformation Grant. It was a grant that was actually submitted by the Center for Disease Control down to Hennepin County, and Hennepin County awarded it to the city of Eden Prairie. So we began that effort about a year ago. We worked with Community Design Group, was the consulting firm that I believe has been before this body before, and they were selected to help us guide through the pedestrian and bicycle master planning effort. The project started an acute community engagement effort around April of this year, and we hosted an open house downstairs. We invited the general public to come in and get some information from them about where they wanted to see the community go. There were about 40 people that attended that open house. I think a number of council members were there as well. And following the open house, we came up to this room, and there was a Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Commission. We presented the plan as a kickoff to them as well. Through the process, we also focused in on some targets that sometimes can be difficult to reach. We held special listening sessions with these focus groups. There was the seniors that we met at the senior center. We also met with the Somali Moms group. We met with them at the Eden Prairie Mall. And then there was also the early childhood family education parents, and we met with them at the Preserve Center. So it was an opportunity just to sit down with them as users to find out what it is that they and their families wanted to see for improvements, where maybe they have seen barriers in our system. And so we got quite a bit of information from them. The next thing we did is we created an internal working group. It was made up of staff members from Hennepin County and the city. There were representatives from Parks and Recreation, streets, planning, engineering, fire, police, people with a lot of knowledge about local issues for walking and bicycling here in our community. So we took all of that information and helped inform the process as well. And then something that we did that was a little bit unique, we created a website, but it was very interactive. People could go online. There were surveys. We'd find out, well, why do you walk? Is it to get to school? Is it to get to work? Is it for recreation purposes? We also had diagrams where we'd ask people, do you feel comfortable in this type of a setting, or do you not feel very comfortable? It was about a 15-minute survey. There was a lot of information that we garnered from that. About 162 people actually completed the survey. We also had a wiki map where people could go online and they could identify, hey, these are the barriers that I encounter when I walk across the community. These are the destinations I'm trying to get to. These are the routes I take. These are the routes I'd like to take, but there's no facilities there. People could even download videos, and they did. The individual with a camera helmet was riding their bike, and they were cut off by a car, and so he submitted, these are the types of issues I deal with on this road. So a lot of information. We actually had 119 unique users who submitted over 280 comments on that wiki page. So a lot of information really came in through our online engagement. Overall, when you take all of the open house, the listening sessions, the online engagement, within that plan, there's 29 pages of information of comments that were submitted that's documented in the plan. So there's a lot of information. And that was good because while we were getting that public information, our consultant, along with city staff and Hennepin County, we were looking at our existing conditions and trying to do an analysis on that. So we look at things like Southwest Transit, where all the bus stops located. People have to walk to get to those. We know LRT's coming. We're going to have 5 stations. People are going to have to walk to get to and from those. So we're starting to take all this information, like where our existing trails are, our existing sidewalks, where we've got recreational trails. All that was already built into our GIS system. And then we started looking at where are the key destinations. If you're a walker and you're want to access one of a key destination. That might be a school, maybe it's your church, maybe it's a grocery store, a park, maybe it's a community pool, community center. A lot of those key destinations, and if you look at the 5-minute walk shed around them, you start to see these little bubbles. That's where people are trying to get to. And you start to see a little trend here. A lot of those key destinations are in our major center area along Valley View Road. They're kind of in the heart of the activity of the community. This takes that same information, but if you're on a bike and you've got maybe a half-mile buffer that you feel comfortable making that 3-minute bike ride, it begins to target on this area of purple where we're saying this is where people are trying to get to. And then the other thing I mentioned, we had the internal working group with all the city staff members. I get calls from the public all the time. I have a difficult time crossing this intersection. Our police folks, they know where the issues are, where the accidents are happening. So we took all of that information, barriers that we knew existed, and we also built that into this existing conditions analysis. And then again, through the online engagement, people could go online and they could map current routes they take, desired routes, strengths in our assets and infrastructure, and destinations. So all of that information that we gathered during the analysis, all of the information that was gathered through the public input began to generate recommendations. This is really the heart of the document. And when you look at there's really 4 key recommendations they're making. The first one is this map, which is showing where the city in the next, like I said, 10 to 20 years focus on making trail improvements or sidewalk improvements. And when you look at this map, you see a lot of green. If it's green, that means they're recommending trails be installed. If it's yellow, they're recommending that a sidewalk can be installed. Those are the dashed lines. Anything that's a solid line is something that exists. And then something that's just a little bit new is that purple dashed line, and we call those the on-street neighborhood slow streets. And these are roadways that are in neighborhoods. They have some connectivity. They're not cul-de-sacs that just end after 100 feet, but they provide connectivity through a neighborhood. And we want people to get off the cul-de-sacs onto those neighborhood slow streets so they could eventually make their way to collector streets, arterial streets. And the challenge here is we want people to drive a reasonable speed because you do have parking, you have a tighter corridor, and so it's making recommendations that you do improvements that help people drive close to the speed limit, 25 to 30 miles an hour within these neighborhoods. Could be installing stop signs, maybe it's just installing a crosswalk. It could be a number of different things. It could even be painting the bicycle symbol out on the street, just to let people know, hey, be a little bit more cautious. You could experience people walking or people on bikes. The second recommendation they made, which is something new for Eden Prairie, would be on-road bicycle lanes. Now, it was a modest attempt to identify some corridors where traffic volumes aren't so high, speeds aren't so high, that it would be a good mix to have cars and vehicle occupy the same roadway. The roads that they've identified are Dell Road, because we wanted roads that did have some connectivity, Valley View Road from Mitchell over to Highway 101, so the western segment of Valley View Road. There was also the Mitchell and Baker Road, again another north-south road. And then finally an east-west road that traversed the entire community, and that would be Anderson Lakes Parkway, and then that transitions into Scenic Heights Drive. So 4 roadways that have modest volumes, modest speeds, and they're, in some cases, they're actually already there. If you look at Mitchell Road, just south of here, there's the shoulders that are striped with the white pavement markings. That's really a bicycle lane. If you just pasted the bicycle symbol, that's what it would be. Same with Scenic Heights Drive, just right over here behind me. That has the shoulder. So some of these almost exist today. Others, it's going to take a reconstruction of the roadway. And someday these roads will need to be reconstructed. And this document is to help inform, if you do reconstruct it, keep this in mind, that it may want to be a bicycle lane and vehicle lane. So again, this plan is not something that happens overnight. This is something that we progress into as we develop, reconstruct roadways. The third recommendation was, you've got all these recommended routes to be installed. We know that it can't be built overnight, so maybe the city should focus in on the next 10 years, maybe these 6 items, and they're in no particular order, but there's something that they're saying, they rise to the level that you should start thinking about them sooner rather than later. The first one is paving the regional trail. It's not the city's regional trail, but it's the regional trail that comes through town. It's gravel surfacing right now, and it is in Minnetonka, and then in Hopkins it turns to asphalt as you go into Minneapolis. So the recommendation here, and we heard this a lot from the public, is pave it. I ride a touring bike with the small tires and I can't use it. I'm a rollerblader, I can't use it. When it's raining, I can't use it, it's too muddy. So for a variety of reasons, they make the recommendation to actually have that paved. Item number 2 is making improvements on Valley View Road where we don't have any facilities right now, and that would be over on the far western edge of the city from Tartan Curve over to Highway 101. There are no facilities. They just dead end right there, and then you get over to Highway 101 and there's a trail there. So fill in that gap. And then here closer to City Center on Plaza Drive over to Valley View Road, making improved enhancement or making the installation of a trail on the north side to match the trail that's on the south side. So that's the north side has a missing segment of trail, so they're recommending that be installed. Then in the Golden Triangle, I think this is largely because of LRTs coming, Shady Oak Road. There really are no facilities for walking or biking in the Golden Triangle. They're saying that Shady Oak Road would provide some connectivity. You should put some trails outside of the roadway. Number 4 was the mall. They're recommending here that you can get up close to the mall, but you can't cross the road and get to the mall. It's almost, you get lost trying to find the front entrance. There is no safe corridor. You're dodging stop signs and a sea of parking lots. So try to make enhancements that make it obvious how to get to the front door and make it convenient and safe. Number 5 is Flying Cloud Drive. That's a key arterial for vehicles. Well, likewise it is for pedestrians and bicyclists too. There are several missing gaps in the system there, so fill that in. Number 6 is Prairie Center Drive around the mall, that part of the ring. Right now there are segments that have sidewalks and it switches to trail, and there's nothing. They're saying there's enough activity there, there's enough pedestrian, enough housing. You just need to make a convenient access all the way around. The 4th recommendation was intersections. What we really found through this study was that you need more than the path. People get intimidated, they don't feel safe, or they don't feel comfortable crossing the busy intersections. That's where the parent says you can go to Eden Prairie Road, but don't cross it. And that's where we break down our system because people don't feel comfortable crossing those major roadways. So they've taken a very close look at where we need to focus on making intersection safety improvements. Again, numbered 1 through 8 in no particular order. And I will say these are the types of intersection improvements they're talking about. Could be very simple. It could be high visibility crosswalk markings. Could be the pedestrian countdown timer so pededs know exactly how much time they have. Maybe it's increasing the amount of walk time. Maybe it's installing pedestrian refuge islands so you can get halfway across the roadway, rest in the refuge, look for a gap and go. Could be a number of different things. And I'll quickly go through those. The first one was Valley View Road at Eden Prairie Road. Fairly obvious, it's a high school, it's got the park, it's got the skate park, it's got the community, it's got a lot of activity. Any holiday that we host seems to be focused, the big ones down there. A lot of activity, make that a little bit more convenient crossing. Number 2 was Eden Prairie Road and Highway 5. If you've ever tried to cross that, you better be looking, your head better be on a swivel because the cars are coming from every different direction. Number 3 was Valley View and Mitchell Road. Number 4, mostly because of the elementary school that's there. This is Anderson Lakes Parkway and Garden Lane. That's where the crosswalk, that's where the crossing guards set up every morning and every afternoon during arrival and dismissal. So making some improvements so it's safer to cross there. 5 was Flying Cloud Drive and Anderson Lakes Parkway. 6 is largely because of the preserve. This is at Centerway and Anderson Lakes Parkway. This is where we've got the community or the neighborhood pool, the tennis courts, the preserve barn. There's a lot of activity there at that marked crosswalk. Number 7 was at Preserve Boulevard and Prairie Center Drive. Again, this ties in with that. Make it a safer entrance into the mall, improve that intersection. And then number 8, a little bit unique. Number 8 is the crossing of the railroad tracks at Eden Prairie High School. It's that well-worn path that people use to get from Duck Lake Road, trespass across the railroad to get to the high school parking lot. And there was a fatality there. It was a number of years ago, but this is the most well-worn path that you can find. It gets a lot of traffic, and I'll be the first to admit I've done that with my children because it's a time saver. If you're trying to get to a football game or to the community center, it'll shave about a third of a mile off your walk if you cut through there. So they're recommending putting a below grade crossing there so that the people can cross without a conflict of the railroad. So the final part of the bike and ped plan was more of a suggestion. It's a toolbox of things that other communities have tried and have found very successful, and that's something that we might want to look at too. I'll kind of go through these quickly. The first is making sure that when new development comes in, or when you're, even city facilities, you're providing those end-of-trip facilities so that people can lock their bikes up to something. And even the comment we received was, make them a little bit more unique than the U. Try to incorporate some art into that. But just making sure primarily you have those facilities so people, when they want to ride a bike, they have a place to lock their bike when they arrive. Number two, or another item that was suggested, was a fix-it station. That's what you see, the red box down there. This would be a station where you get a flat tire, you can buy a tube. You can use the device there to air up your tire. You could buy brake pads, maybe you snap a wire. But just a vending machine that you can make those types of repairs on the fly. Good location for this would be the transit stations, both bus and LRT. Another suggestion was enhancing your wayfinding. And I'll be the first to admit, when I first moved here, there are no north, south, east, west roads. It's easy to get lost if you're not familiar. So it was intimidating for me to enjoy the trails because I didn't know where I would end up once I got on them. Enhancing that experience by providing wayfinding. And then they also took a look at some key intersections that we hear a lot about. This is the regional trail by Bear Path on Dell Road. So they had a few suggestions of ways you could make that a safer crossing by making some minor improvements. Other things they touched on was snow removal, making sure that when we're plowing our roads, we're not creating new barriers for people that want to bike or walk, making sure that sidewalks are accessible. Also, something that we've heard from Councilmember Nelson quite a bit is benches, making sure that as we are putting in facilities that we're keeping in mind that there might be places where we want to stop and rest, so making sure that you're providing those facilities. And even at end-of-trip facilities where maybe it's the Southwest Transit where they've installed all these benches, there are some places where it makes good sense to have those on a site. And then finally, for those that are managing construction, it's always easy to throw your barrels and signs out in the middle of a sidewalk, but making sure you're not creating barriers by doing that. One of the things that we really seem to like from this toolbox of suggestions was creating a very identifiable, a highly visible Eden Prairie community loop. And this would be a loop that, with the help of Stuart A. Fox, we were able to outline a trail that touched all four quadrants of the community. It also hit on a lot of our main assets like Round Lake, Rice Marsh Lake, Lake Riley, Starring Lake, Purgatory Park. This loop, while it is a large loop, would be able to traverse the entire community and hit where we focused a lot of our resources making improvements to our park system. We see this as something where people would want to come to Eden Prairie to ride this loop. And it would take some improvements like creating signage, making it very identifiable so that people, once they get on, they know where to go and what's next. But something that I see has a lot of promise for our community. Another thing that they talked on was education and enforcement. Doing programs like the bike rodeo, or maybe it's working with the school districts on a Safe Routes to School program to make sure that, some of those things that the kids and parents might realize are barriers to letting them walk, be a forum for us to find that out, and as engineers and enforcement community could help correct some of those issues. Other ideas might be developing a complete streets policy so that when we do reconstruction, we're keeping all this in mind: vehicles, pedestrians, walkers, streetscaping, all of that when it comes to the actual design and construction. Another idea they suggested was applying to become a bicycle-friendly community. That might open up the door for grant opportunities for a lot of these improvements. And then finally, from an engineering perspective, they suggested taking a look at some of our design standards. Again, incorporating pedestrian refuge islands where a safe harbor for people to cross halfway across the road, look for the gap, do the other half of the roadway. Pedestrian bump outs, just so that pedestrians, when they do cross, they're visible to the driver, they're not hidden behind a parked car. And also some suggestions on guidelines for installing marked crosswalks, or maybe when you should do the flashing beacon, or maybe the hawk signal, or maybe a traffic signal. So just some guidelines on when certain treatments are necessary based on traffic volumes, traffic speeds, pedestrian volumes. So with that, tonight, my only intention was to present the plan, allow you an opportunity to review it, offer any input, ask me any questions. This has been presented to the Planning Commission, as well as the Parks and Recreation Natural Resources Commission. They've endorsed it, and they've recommended that the City Council adopt this. I intend to come back December 2nd at the City Council meeting and ask for City Council's recommendation or approval of the document itself. I will say that having a document like this in place does open up a lot of opportunities for grants. There's a lot of grant money out there for bike and ped facility installation. People are beginning to realize that walking and biking are just as important as hopping in a car, and that we need to make sure that these types of facilities are being planned and installed where appropriate. So I think this document will go a long ways in showing that our community supports walkers and bikers, maybe opens up doors for funding opportunities as well. So with that, I stand for any questions or any input.
Okay. Councilmember Nelson.
It looks like a good program. I love the fact that it's filling in the holes and looking at safety and looking at ways for kids to get to school, and also the bicycle racks and benches. I did notice on page 121, when talking about ancillary and end-of-trip rest facilities, that talk to adjacent to commercial and employment others. I also wish it would include something about large senior housing facilities, since they have asked for that, and possibly even going so far as to say other very dense housing situations where you've got a lot of people that might be walking or biking places. I would sort of like that more than just, you know, employment areas and commercial areas to go on to that dense housing and senior housing.
Anybody else?
I would just say that it's a very comprehensive plan, and I think, you know, obviously a lot of work went into it, and I'm very pleased at the product that you guys came up with as part of the process, and I think it really will go a long way towards helping us to plan for the future.
Yeah, it's a really thorough report, and I'm really happy with the amount of outreach that the city did to try to get input from all of the stakeholders that might be involved in this. And there were many different opportunities and many different ways to get involved in that process, so I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see the scenic loop is in there. That was one of my biggies that I really wanted to see, and I think there's a lot of potential there to have a really beautiful trail with signage to allow people to easily tell how to get around that whole loop. I think that would be fabulous. My question is, can you tell me how this report is going to be used? You talked about how when roads are reconstructed, when new development comes in, or when we have to reconstruct roads, that we'll be using this report to guide us. So it can't just go on a shelf. I mean, every time a road is coming in for reconstruction, you can pull this off the shelf and see what was envisioned with the bike and pedestrian plan, and then you'll also use it to help us get grants to do some of these things.
Yes, Madam Mayor, City Council, absolutely. This is a document that I see getting a lot of use. I see this getting whipped out every time a major development project comes in. Anytime that there's a grant opportunity out there, this will get pulled out and reference that, hey, this plan, which was adopted unanimously, called for this as a top priority. In fact, when I come back December 2nd, I will also have a request to approve a resolution of support for a Safe Routes to School grant to install that pedestrian underpass for the Eden Prairie High School. I've been working with the school district on that as well, because they would need to pass a resolution of support to apply for that. So, no, I see this getting a lot of use. In fact, the 10-year capital improvement program does have funding in there for trail and sidewalk installations on an annual basis. I think that this document will guide where those funds are used. So, no, this will be a very active document. I think that it will be used on a number of occasions, whether it's for trying to find funding, or it's guiding how redevelopment is done, or it's informing us when we start doing reconstruction what that roadway needs to look like.
Okay. Councilmember Wickstrom.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing. I think that we need, it's a very important piece, not just for our present, but really for our future. And, I mean, this is what we need to be doing to be that healthy community that our mayor supports and advocates, as we all do. But I would like to see something more proactive, and I would like to see, as you said, that it's a part of a larger plan. And grants are great, but if there are any other funding sources that we could put toward this and in a prioritized way. And some of these things are not that expensive to do. So, I mean, even working with other departments, if there's some ways that we can start checking off the list and actually implementing them, I would be pleased about that. And then one other question I have, and I'm sorry I might have missed it when you were giving your overview, but we have this new green development that will be built soon. And that, to me, seems like such a natural environment for making sure that there's connectivity or some kind of, I don't know, demonstration of how a green neighborhood could have other sort of healthy ways to assist our residents. So I don't know if there's anything special planned for that area?
Well, I would say that it has good connectivity now because there are a number of trails that exist along Eden Prairie Road.
Okay.
One of the recommendations is that Scenic Heights Drive have bicycle lanes installed. That would be at the front door of the green neighborhood so that people could traverse the city using a faster mode of transportation. When you're in the road, you can really cruise. You don't have to stop at each intersection, go up and down the ramp. So I think that it's well suited where it's located to tie in with the rest of our infrastructure that we have. The other thing I'll point out is that a lot of what you see in that green neighborhood are a lot of the things that we would look at incorporating into the complete streets policy as far as, and we actually want to take it a little step farther. It's called a living streets policy. It takes all of the components of a complete street, but it also looks at the green side, how you manage your stormwater, the landscaping, the vegetation. It incorporates all that. And I think when I look at the Eden Gardens neighborhood, I see a lot of that within that development. So
Robert, when I'm thinking about the outskirts of that green neighborhood, and I know it's 45 miles an hour on that road. Is it safe to cross? Is it easy to cross? Is there for people wanting to get on the other side so you can go to Dunn Brothers or whatever, is there I don't remember. I've not really walked it. Is there a light that you can press and walk across?
there is. There's a traffic signal with pedestrian push buttons. I don't know if it has the countdown timers. I don't know those details, but that's something that could certainly be looked at, yes.
Okay. I just wondered. I had not walked that particular stretch.
Great. So we'll hear from you at our December 2nd meeting. Thank you very much for the presentation. The next item, the final item, is the report from our city attorney. As you remember, last spring we passed an ordinance regarding e-cigarettes and use of e-cigarettes within the city. And Mr. Rosso, do you want to go into this item?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council. In February, the council considered a number of matters. One, you approved the first reading of an ordinance for tobacco license or the retail sale of e-cigarettes, and also an ordinance prohibiting the use of e-cigarettes in all locations covered by the Minnesota Clean Air Act and the Eden Prairie Smoke-Free Air Ordinance. Then that was followed up in March by second reading and approval of both of those items. You also adopted at the February meeting a moratorium, a one-year moratorium on hookah lounges, e-cigarettes, and other kind of related lounges, if they're called something other than a hookah lounge. And that's what we're back with tonight. So I brought for one last opportunity in the city hall. I will retire it. Actually, I've only used it once. The e-cigarette, but this is an e-cigarette. Charges in your computer with a little device. I've actually never charged it. Read about them exploding, so I didn't want to subject my computer to any damage. Tonight, we have before you an ordinance that would prohibit the sampling of tobacco-related products, and it also cleans up the definition of tobacco so that it's a little more encompassing. There was some comment from the county that they thought our definition excluded cigarettes, and we didn't think that was the case, but if the county thought that, we wanted to clean that up as well. And so this ordinance would prohibit, and so e-cigarettes, all sorts of tobacco-related products. It's a list longer than a long paragraph of these kinds of products. You would not be allowed to sample them in the stores or use them in hookah lounges, etc. So that's the ordinance you have before you. The report that accompanies the ordinance identifies on the third page what we knew about a month ago in terms of what other cities were doing. Cities have taken a variety of actions, including the actions we're proposing tonight, prohibiting all indoor smoking of e-cigarettes, prohibiting the hookah lounges, doing licensing, no smoking in retail stores, prohibiting sampling, etc. across the board. Cities like Roseville, Faribault, Shoreview, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, St. Anthony, Arden Hills, Oakdale, Shakopee, the city of Savage, which I also represent, just adopted a similar ordinance to this at its last meeting. So cities are continuing to do that. Minneapolis was in the paper this week about a committee voting 6-0 to do basically something very similar to this. So this is the third leg of the group of resolutions and ordinances that we brought to you. Careful with that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Case.
Well, I brought this forward back in February, and I think I had just read about it in a magazine that it was fairly new, cutting edge. I mean, communities were just beginning to look at it, and since then, in the last 8 to 9 months, you've got your list, but we've been joined across the nation by counties and cities and states and the federal government even looking at. So I have no problem tonight staying as clean, and I think really helping with the preciseness of it, of going with your first recommendation, or the first of the 3 options, and that would be just prohibit everything and just not allow sampling. So I see nods of heads. Would you be comfortable if I just made a motion? Then I believe this motion covers that, the one that's on here. Is that correct? So I would move to approve the first reading of an ordinance amending City Code Section 5.35 prohibiting the sampling of tobacco-related products.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of the ordinance?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Is there...
Mr. Rosso looked like he was going to say something. Are you okay?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
No,
You looked like you were going to add something.
No.
You were disappointed, the hookah lounge?
He wanted to smoke.
Yeah.
No, not at all. I was not. I was just reflecting on thinking
Just thinking.
about what the next steps. It's coming back to you for second reading on December 2nd, and then publication, and then it'll be effective after publication. So about mid-December.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you
All
for
right.
your work on that.
Any other business to bring forth to the council?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.